Hello, everyone. A good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. My name is Amanullah Sand. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project implemented by British Council activities in Pakistan as a response to COVID-19 crisis. It is an initiative to support teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. We are thankful to Master English Training for sponsoring a Zoom account. In today's webinar, PBL in English language learning, no problem. We'll explore the tenets of one form of problem-based learning before comparing it with its linguistic equivalent, task-based learning. We'll discuss the importance of applying a PBL approach directly to English language learning, where learner independence goes beyond the confines of merely completing a task. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mick King for this webinar. Dr. Mick King is a chair of Languages and Literature, Community College of Qatar. Over the last 30 years, he has taught, lectured, and managed in Europe and the Arabian Gulf. He has disseminated research on eclectic topics, including PBL. His interest in PBL stems from tutoring students in service management for over a decade, during which he first applied the PBL model to English language learning classroom as part of an action research project. As PBL forms part of his general teaching philosophy, he is always happy to promote its use. We are very happy to have you, Mick. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much to you, Amanullah, for reaching out to ask me if I would like to participate. I think that the project is an amazing project, which is beneficial to so many people. So I'm really happy to support it. And I'm going to be talking about something which I like talking about, which is PBL. So I'm going to share my screen and, and get started. While I'm sharing my screen, maybe in the chat, people, you can just start to put messages about where you're from. So which part of the world you are from.
So we have 28 people at the moment in the chat, and
Namaste from Nepal. Very good. Heather, I know Heather.
Qatar. Lana from Sudan. Aisha Madid from Pakistan.
From Iran. Wow, we're really international.
From Mongolia, from Malaysia.
Olivia, wow, we're going across continents. That's fantastic. Maybe some more people join, and I just want to say hi to the people on Facebook as well. If you're on Facebook, we won't be able to interact directly, but maybe Amanullah can share as required some of the things that you want to share with me. I'm going to close my chat box because it's going to distract me a little bit. But what also would be nice to know is maybe we can we raise hands, Amanullah? Is that an option? Is the raise hand option available or not? Okay, no problem. We'll stick with the chat box. So it would also be interesting to.
There's an option to raise hand.
Oh, you can. So I'm just wondering if people are actually English teachers or whether they're teaching different subjects. So maybe just go in the chat. Just tell me what the subject is that you teach, your main subject.
Yes, you can.
I think we'll just use the chat. So just English, and education, great. And a translator, interesting.
A lot of ELTs here.
So there's a lot of, maybe there's quite a TESOL bias here, which is not a bad thing because the subject is, of course, PBL in English language learning, no problem. The reason that I'm saying no problem is because the PBL, what I'm talking about today is problem-based learning. It's not project-based learning, it's problem-based learning, which is a little bit different. And many people would argue that you can't really apply problem-based learning in English language learning. My argument today is that we can, and possibly we can, if we can't do it exactly, we can at least try to take some of the tenets of PBL and apply it into our classrooms. So today in the session, it's kind of a workshop. In the chat box, I'll be asking you now and again to give your comments, okay, to give your comments and answer certain tasks that I'm going to give you. So it will be quite handy if you have a pen and paper next to you, just to jot down some things for the questions that I'm going to ask you. By the end of the session, hopefully you'll be in a position to explain to others the tenets of problem-based learning. You will understand the link and the differences between problem-based learning and its language equivalent, which is task-based learning. You will see how PBL can be applied to some elements of TESOL, not all. And finally, hopefully you can reflect on how you might utilize the tenets of PBL in your teaching context. I know that when you registered, you were asked to maybe to put a question, but maybe it's difficult because you don't quite know what question to ask. So as we go through the session, Amanullah, if you wouldn't mind, just if anyone writes question in capital letters and then writes their question, maybe you can collate the questions, and so I can address some of those questions at the end. Okay, I think we're good to continue. So
Yep.
Today I'm going to start by giving you an introduction to problem-based learning, explain to you how we do problem-based learning, how we can adapt it to TESOL, and then at the end we will have some time for reflection. I hope I'll manage to finish in the time. So what is PBL? Well, if you look at this particular picture here, you can see that PBL is, I'm sorry, I'll come out of a screen, I've come out of slideshow. Just do this. Okay, no problem. I'll go back to slideshow. Unfortunately, I can't see the chat, so that's a shame, but never mind. So what is PBL? Now, if you look at this picture, we can see what's called a PBL session. I'm just wondering if anybody could identify where the teacher is in this. Because everyone's in a circle and everyone seems to look the same way. So is there somebody here who is the teacher? You may have guessed that it is this lady on the right-hand side with the short brown hair next to the gentleman with the white sweater. This is what we call the tutor. And they're sitting in a circle. So there's no hierarchy in the positioning of the students. And this is what a PBL session would normally look like. You'll see why a little bit later. We're going to come back to this picture later on. Now, I'm going to try to play for you, I hope it works, a little YouTube video. It's about 3 minutes long, about the problem-based learning system that I learned. I worked in a problem-based learning university for 11 years, 3 years in the Netherlands and 8 years here in Qatar. And I learned what PBL was, and I learned how beneficial it could be. And I've basically adopted it in my teaching ever since. Even if I haven't been teaching in a PBL environment, I try to use some of the key elements of PBL to make my teaching more relevant for my students in ways that you will see later. So I'm going to click on this and keep our fingers crossed that it will play in YouTube. Cannot download the information requested. Okay. This is a shame. Let me just come out of here and maybe I can. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm having a bit of a problem here with the technology. Let me just see if I can go straight into YouTube. No, it's not letting me do that. Okay, I'm going to use a search engine, see if I can get it. I've got it.
Sorry to interrupt, Mick. We don't see, any video on the screen.
Just 1 minute, please.
All right.
Yeah, sorry, Amanula. What's the problem? You couldn't see the video?
Yeah.
Could you hear it?
We couldn't see the video.
Could you hear it? Could you hear
not here. Because, no.
Okay, I'll try one more time. Just see if we can try. Just shout out if you can hear.
Yes, we can. Now we can.
Perfect.
PBL? What is that? Well, PBL is a learning approach. At Stenden University, real-life professional problems serve as... It is called problem-based learning, thus PBL. Most of the time, you'll be studying at our school. Very often, you won't study within a class, but in a group. Your group consists of about 12 fellow students. In turns, you'll be the chairperson, the minute maker or secretary, the board writer, or a regular group member. A teacher facilitates the PBL session. In PBL, he is not called a teacher, but a tutor. Every week, you'll be working together on various problems. So, learning in PBL starts with a real-life problem from your future profession. And then, we're going to explain this to you now. Every group meets twice a week to deal with the problem. You aren't just going to do that offhand, because PBL has a clear structure. You work on the problem in 7 steps. The first step will be to read the text. You'll find out if everyone has understood the text and the problem. From there, you'll have a common starting point. Together, you'll frame the central topic and discuss it in detail. During the second step, all of you determine what kind of problem it is and formulate a clear problem definition based on the central topic. During step 3, the group has to get an overview of the existing prior knowledge by analyzing the problem. You can achieve that through brainstorming, for example. It is about free flow of thought and ideas about the central topic. Whether they are realistic is not important yet. During the next step, step 4, you will arrange all the input in such a way so that a clear structure becomes visible. In the fifth step, potential knowledge gaps will be discussed, as well as topics you still have to deal with to be able to grasp the problem completely. Your group will define the learning goals for your individual study that will lead to new knowledge. Mostly, you will carry out step 6 on your own, for example, through an interview with an expert. Or you look for a quiet place at school or stay at home to look up a variety of theories, facts and information in your books and on the internet. You'll write down the information gathered and also what you have learned. That way, you will be well prepared for the group discussion during step 7. In step 7, you and your peers will discuss the findings from your individual study, led by the chairperson. All of you bring in new information. And through talking and listening, explaining and asking questions, you will have acquired new knowledge. That way, within a few weeks, you'll gain knowledge about issues you'll encounter in your future profession. In the same session after step 7, everyone begins reading up on a new problem, and your group starts afresh at step 1. That's how PBL works.
Okay, so that kind of gives you a quick overview of the PBL that I learned. So as you can see, this kind of system is very much geared towards a small groups and giving students a problem which they will address in one session, and they will try to work out a problem statement. They will analyze the problem. They will then come up with a series of learning goals which they need to study outside the classroom. And the next lesson, they'll come back and they will tell what they have found. So it's not necessarily always a problem that they're solving. They're just being given a situation which will lead them to create some learning goals, and they will try to then find out as much as they can about this and report back the next session. Now, on the screen in front of you, we have a list of skills which might be associated with problem-based learning, or they might be associated with traditional learning. What I would like you to do, if you have a piece of paper or a pen, is just to take 1 minute to try to decide if each of these things are PBL or traditional learning. So for example, the first one, teacher-centered, this would of course be normally traditional learning. So just take 1 minute to try and decide which is which of these is based on problem-based learning and which can be linked to traditional learning.
Chrissy says number 1 is traditional.
It is, yes. I'm not going to give you too long because
say, guys?
we've got a lot to get through.
So number 2 is PBL.
Traditional learning.
Oh, we have audio. I didn't realize that you could also speak up. Oh, fantastic. So let's have a look. The traditional would be teacher-centered, very often memorization-based, with a real bias on collecting knowledge, just learning knowledge, and also the one-answer syndrome. And students are often very fond of the one-answer syndrome because they're thinking about exams. What is the answer? I want to know the answer. They don't like it to be fuzzy. They like it to be very clear and precise. PBL, on the other hand, is very much student-centered, based on discovery. So students are finding out information. In order to find out that information, they're using a whole range of different skills. And they may find at the end that the information they find does not come to one exact answer. There could be multiple outcomes from the information that they find outside the classroom. So you have to have a certain mindset to feel comfortable in PBL. If you like the mindset of like, I want to know the right answer and there must only be one answer, you might find PBL difficult. But as we know in life, life is not so straightforward. There's often many different answers to questions. Let's go to the next list here. I want you to make comparisons between task-based learning, which is very common in English language teaching, and problem-based learning. So again, from the list that we have, is this to do with PBL or is it to do with task-based learning, where in the language class we give a task to students and we ask them to determine themselves what linguistic skills they need to complete the task? So maybe you can shout out the answers because we have the audio here. So just say to me task-based or say to me PBL. So the first one, task-based, is of course, can somebody say
Multiple outcomes is also a task-based learning. Multiple outcomes is also a task-based.
We'll go one by one. So task-based is task-based. Multiple outcomes
Is also a task-based learning.
All right, we'll have a look in a minute. Applied language, applying language.
Applied
I think it's
language
better.
is task-based learning.
I think it's better to use the chat box.
But unfortunately, I can't see the chat
box. Use the chat box, participant.
I'm sorry, but I can't.
I'll read it for you.
Personally, I can't see the chat box. Okay, so that's why I'm saying it's better if you just on your own, do it on your own on a piece of paper, and just then I'll share the answers. I'll just give you 1 minute. Some of them are very straightforward, some of them maybe not so. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide and we'll see which goes into which group. So task-based is of course task-based, it's linked to language. We use critical thinking in task-based learning because students have to make decisions, but it is quite explicitly guided. We give the students a very clear instruction on what the task is and what they have to do. And often there are fixed outcomes. So let's say, for example, you have to come up with a report or a presentation or act out a skit or something like this. And therefore the skills will be quite prescribed in that, of course, if you have to give a presentation, there are very, very clear skills on what to do. For PBL, it is problem or task-based. It, of course, uses critical thinking, but the guidance here is implicit. You don't tell the students what they have to do. They have to analyze the task and decide what it is they have to do. And that's where it gets quite difficult. The students may find different outcomes and different results from the problem. So the skills which are used could be prescribed, but they could also be ancillary. We don't know exactly what skills the students will be using to find out the information that they need to find out. Again, a lot of people don't feel comfortable with this because it's too fuzzy, but it can be very exciting if you're in a PBL class, as we'll talk about later. So in a PBL curriculum, you would not have lectures as the center of your course. So certainly at the tertiary level, the lecture is the key to the knowledge provision. You give knowledge through the lecture, then you do workshops, seminars, labs, and so on. In the PBL curriculum, the PBL session is at the center of what you do. It's the most important course in the program. And the lecture will be there to serve the PBL session, okay, not the other way around. If you are going to design, therefore, your PBL sessions, you do it very much as you would do any other kind of course design. You would start by looking at the syllabus or the curriculum and looking at the student learning outcomes. You might identify one particular outcome and then, or maybe even a sub-outcome, and then you would try and design a PBL task which will allow you to check that the students have met that outcome, and then you can evaluate whether they have done that at the end. So we take the student learning outcomes, we convert them into tasks, and then we get students to do things to show that they have met those particular outcomes. So I keep talking about a task. What do we mean by a task? Well, there are two types of tasks in PBL regarding the number of steps. The first set of tasks are very similar to task-based learning. We call them the 4 steps, where basically you get a task, you follow the instructions and you decide how to do it, you prepare the task, and then you carry out the task. So again, the task could be to go and do some research into the shops in your high street, count them, see how many there are, and then come back and present this in a presentation, and that would be the task. More complicated and more interesting for me is what we call the 7 steps. And I already explained to you that process, and we saw it in the video. You're given a task, which is normally a short text. And the short text doesn't really tell you to do anything. It's just like a little story or a scenario or something like this. And then, because you're doing the particular module, you will start to say, okay, what is this task about? What is it actually, what area are we trying to focus on here? This is where you will try to formulate a problem statement. Like in the video, we saw the thing about the fish, okay? About the fish and water, and we'll come back to that later. The third step is to analyze the problem. And we can analyze the problem in a number of ways. So some of the ones which we know very well, I think, is to brainstorm, to do a mind map. We can also do the WH questions. So we can, for example, write down all the question words, what, who, where, when, how many, how much, and then try to create questions which will help us to learn more about this particular problem. Once we have done this analysis, or as we're doing the analysis, oh, sorry, I missed out too. So the fishbone analysis is one where you basically, you draw a fishbone, the whole fish on the screen. In the head, you write the problem, and then you write the causes to the problem on the fish bones. And if you have these fish bones like this, you'll write the causes of the problem. This is very similar in the 5W method, which is basically keep asking the question why. So how can why does a fish need water? And then you find the answer. And then you ask why to that question, and so on until you get back to the main cause of a situation. The 4th stage is try to synthesize all these ideas from the brainstorm or the analysis, and you'll end up with a series of learning goals. Okay, the students have to formulate learning goals, which will help them to answer their problem statements. Now, it's very important that the tutor does not give the learning goals. The tutor normally has a piece of paper with the projected learning goals that the student should get, but they shouldn't share that information with the students. The students have to work it out for themselves. The tutor will help in other ways, and we'll see that a little bit later, what I mean by that. Once the students have the learning goals, they will leave the session, they will go and do their research and reading and maybe interviewing people and so on, and they'll get the answers to their questions. The next session, they come back and they all share in the group what they found, and they try to draw some conclusions regarding the problem statement. So one question to ask is, which of these problem analysis tools would be the most appropriate for which kind of problem? Remember, I said that the 5 classic tools that I learned are brainstorming, mind map, WH questions, fishbone analysis, and the 5W method. So if we had a question, a problem statement like, how can a fish survive without water? We would be trying to use one of these methods based on our prior knowledge. So if we have no prior knowledge, we would use certain methods. If we have some prior knowledge, we would use others. And if we had problem solution or cause effect, we would use others. Now, as you probably are not surprised to know, the ones which try to find the cause of a problem will tend to be used for problem solution or cause effect. However, if you only have some small knowledge or some prior knowledge of the subject, you might be more inclined to use brainstorming, mind map, and WH questions. Students in general, unless it's a clear problem solution, they like to use brainstorming or mind map, which is fine. So if you're going to use a 4-step task, it's very straightforward. It's just like task-based learning. It could be a study task where you're told to go and study from a book. It could be an action task where you have to perform an activity, like give a presentation, or it could be an application task where you'll need to apply knowledge you already have in a real-world scenario. So you'll be asked to, for example, maybe you might say, if you're doing a tourism course, you might read something in a textbook and then apply it to the category situation or to the situation of your country. This is a typical example of what you might see in a study task or an application task. Here it is a combined task. I'm just going to give you 1 minute to read the task, just so you get an idea. So here you can see that the students are being asked just to find information, name this, describe this, but also they're being asked, of course, then to use higher thinking skills like formulate your own definition of ecotourism based on the 2 definitions you found, or apply ecotourism to your own situation or other destinations that you have visited. So there's still an element of higher order thinking skills here, but we see them more in the 7-step tasks. So 7-step tasks are split into 3 types. I'm going to start from the bottom. You could just have a text which leads into a discussion. And so the students will follow the same 7 steps, but it will lead to a discussion on a particular topic based on what they find outside. A strategy task is fairly straightforward in that there's not really a need to make a problem statement, because you'll be given an instruction asking you to say, what would you do in this given scenario? The most opaque, the most difficult one to do perhaps is the problem task, because it's not always clear what the problem is and you have to analyze the text and come up with a problem statement. So I just want to give you an example of a strategy task, okay? This one is not very complicated. Regarding time, so I know that you have time to read it, I'll read it aloud, and so you can see what we mean by a strategy task. So James was sent as Area Director of Marketing to Skyline Hotel, Qatar. During their study of profit ratios of their hotels around the globe, the market research team of Skyline Hotels realized that the profits of Skyline were dipping in Qatar. James observed that guests in Qatar instinctively preferred other 5-star hotels to Skyline. James realized that he needed to adopt different marketing strategies to popularize the hotel among prospective guests. For this, he realized that he needed to further study guest needs in the region in order to attract them. With his business acumen and knowledge of marketing plans and methods, he started to explore ways in which he could adapt hotel services to suit guests' requirements. So this is our situation. This is our scenario. This is our little text. Then comes the strategy side. If you were James, what is the marketing plan that you would decide on and the marketing methods that you would explore and adopt in order to popularize Skyline Hotel in Qatar? Suggest ways of adapting marketing strategies to suit guest needs in Qatar. Now, students who are faced with this task, the way it's written, they probably wouldn't have much knowledge of marketing at this point. So they'd be picking up expressions from the text like marketing strategies, guests, guest needs, things like this, and then doing their brainstorm to try to work out what is it we need to learn in order to do what is required if we were James. So their learning outcomes might be finding out information like what is the marketing plan, what are marketing methods, but then they'll start to contextualize it by talking about Qatar. And they'll have a series of questions which they will try to answer. So remember, the 7 steps would be, they read the task, they formulate the problem statement, analyze the problem, synthesize their ideas, make learning goals, answer these at home, and then the next session, share their findings and draw conclusions. We come back to our picture, okay? Now that you know something about how PBL works, I now want to talk about the people in the PBL session and the process of PBL. What does the tutor do? Well, the tutor maybe is writing the task or designing it, but they may just be taking the task from somebody else. And in this session, they will be facilitating the learning. In the perfect PBL session, the tutor will never talk, okay? Because they'll just be checking that the students are on the right track. When they need to, they will come in and they will advise the students, especially if they see the students are getting frustrated on going and moving away from the focus of the task. So they'll try to bring them back in by using Socratic questioning and so on, but not by giving them the answer. So they will prompt sometimes. They will prompt the students, like, have you considered this? So, that's interesting what you said, but is there some other angle we can look at or something like this? They coach the students. They're coaching them through this process. And at the end of the session, they'll give students feedback on how they performed in the session regarding their communication skills, their listening skills, and so on. So what does the student do in the PBL session? Well, they have to identify a problem. They have to analyze it. They have to work together as a team. They have to be very respectful of each other's viewpoints and not let the same people always take the lead. So they have to listen to what other people are saying. We all know that sometimes when we want to say something, we don't listen to what the person is saying before us, but it's very important in PBL to listen to what people have said. And they need to react to what people have said. And of course, reflection is really, really important in this process as well. So as you saw in the video, there'll be certain roles in the PBL meeting. The tutor is there to facilitate. There'll be one person of the students who is the chairperson, and they will lead the meeting. A secretary will take the minutes of the meeting. So there are business skills being applied here. There'll be a board secretary who will be the person who writes the problem analysis on the board and also writes up the learning outcomes based on the feedback from the group. And then all the other group members will be actively analyzing, listening, discussing, and evaluating. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in this session. It's not just a unidimensional transmission of information. There are various people in the room bouncing off each other and learning from each other. I'm just looking at the time. The time is a little bit, it's running quite quickly. So I don't think I'm going to go through this problem task example, but I will share these slides with Amanullah. I think he already has them. So they could be maybe shared on the in another format with anyone who's interested.
Yes.
So what are the benefits?
I have slides and I can share it, but if we can go a little bit above the time, it's okay. So it's on your convenience.
All right. So maybe I'll come back to this problem task. I'll see how we go. But I want to get on to the part where we start to apply this to English. Yeah, I know that not everybody's an English teacher here, but
sure.
I need to explain what it is in order to explain how we can apply it to English. So what are the benefits for our students? Well, of course, they need to think critically. They need to think and they need to work independently. They need to work together. They need to employ research skills when they go outside the classroom. They need to employ business meeting skills in the actual session. And of course, they have to have very strong communication skills of listening and reacting and respecting each other. So, and they have to be active. We know that in other types of lessons that somebody can stay at the back and fall asleep. In PBL, you can't. Okay, you're often in a circle, everyone can see what you're doing. And it's the duty of the chair to make sure that everybody is participating. However, I'm sure going through your head is thinking like, this isn't going to work. Yeah, and you're right, it can be difficult sometimes. There can be many challenges in conducting PBL. Firstly, if students are doing it in their second or third language, it requires so much linguistic interaction that can be challenging for some students. I have some strategies that I've used when I've done PBL with low language level students in English. Outside the group, I would try to encourage the ones who are not so good, just to set a target, like try to interject 3 times during the session, and only you and me will know, okay? But when you do it, I will like give you a wink, so 1, 2, 3, and just to build up their confidence. And because the atmosphere of the group should be very congenial, then people should encourage each other, and generally they do. Now, trying to change students' learning styles can be very difficult if they're not used to this kind of learning. So PBL training is needed. You need to train your students to understand that this is not going to be like a normal class. And just because the teacher is not talking, it doesn't mean it's a bad teacher. If the task is well designed and the tutor is facilitating and helping the students reach where they need to be, then this is good tutoring. Maybe it's not good teaching, but it's excellent tutoring. But sometimes students don't understand that. I once had 2 students who came to me at the end of a session. They were new students, and they said, "Why aren't you teaching us?" This is what they wanted. They wanted me to stand at the front to explain, and they just wrote things down. The idea that there's no one answer can be very frustrating for students, especially if you have a final exam linked to the module. Personally, I think if you do PBL, you should never have a summative sit-down exam. It should be assignments, portfolios, reflections, and this realization that in life, it's not always that easy. You know, James and his strategy, there may not be one answer. He may try something and it may not go right. So it's good to get different student perspectives on the different ways that James could apply his strategy to help Skyline Hotel. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of sit-down assessments for PBL, although unfortunately it still exists. And when it exists, it ruins PBL because the students just want to know what's going to be on the test. They just want the answer. And students find it hard sometimes because they have to be so active. They're not used to it. So, but when they get used to it, believe me, it becomes a really exciting space for learning. The students are really, really active. They are inquisitive. They are learning together. It really can be very, very nice. Sometimes cultural norms of interaction can be a problem. So people are not used to speaking up. They are not used to listening. They are not used to somebody's suggesting that what they said is not right unless it's the teacher. So that can be a challenge. And again, you have to try to train the students in PBL etiquette. And again, group size. Sometimes we have these huge groups. So how are we going to do PBL when we have 50 students or 30 students? These are all challenges that I recognize. And we'll come back to some of those challenges later. But now before we're coming to the last 15 minutes. So let's just think about how we can apply this to TESOL. Amanula, maybe you can share with me from the chat. I've asked people to discuss in the chat these ideas. You know, can you think of how you could use this in your own classrooms? Is it possible to do this with low-level learners? Is it possible to do this with young learners? And how might you adapt the tenets of PBL to make your students work things out for themselves? Can I just give you like 2 or 3 minutes just to jot down your ideas, and then Amanula, maybe you can share them with me.
Sure. I'm monitoring the chat box. So participant, what do you think about these questions? Aisha Majid says for listening and speaking skills, it can be adopted. Paula says using small projects. And Aisha says it will work best with young learners. Maggie says it is possible to adopt in ESL class. Joachim says, how can I introduce a new subject using PBL?
Okay, thank you very much for those responses. It's interesting that somebody said it's possible with young learners, because normally this is applied actually with older learners, with the tertiary level or a higher secondary level. But I mean, I think it can be done.
We have other response from Fabiha. He said, yes, this is applicable for young learners. I think it is the best platform to increase the thinking ability of the students, and they try to relate the task with a real scenario and find out different conclusions.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I think you can adapt. I mean, I don't think a problem task would be suitable for young learners. It would be too difficult to work it out. But you could sort of go for a strategy task or something like this. So that might be possible. With low-level learners, I'm not sure if it's really that easy to apply PBL. I think that they need to have a minimal level of language if they are. I'm talking here about language learning, of course, to be able to cope with the linguistic demands of doing PBL. Maybe at the end, we can get more ideas when I come back into the room and I'm no longer in share screen, about how you can apply it in your own classrooms. And I think if we can't apply PBL exactly, we can certainly get this from PBL and we can apply it in our own contexts. So I think that a lot of the time in TESOL, task-based learning is more appropriate, like noticing tasks or doing a task like giving a presentation. This is more applicable to language learning. But there are areas where we can get students to work out what they want to know and decide for themselves how they are going to find it out. I'll give you an example from myself. The research that I did into this, it was an action research project. I decided to design a dissertation writing course based on PBL principles, because the students that I had at the time, they didn't want to do another English course in their final year. They said, we did English already, we did it in foundation. And so I had to market it in a different way. Now those students had been PBL students. So I thought, let me apply PBL to learning how to write a dissertation. So I did not give lectures on how to write a dissertation. I got them, through the tasks that I developed, to work out what made a good dissertation. I got them to go and find out information about what makes a good dissertation. This is one example of a task. And I'll give you, just because of time, I'm going to actually tell you what the actual purpose of this was. This was to try to encourage students to realize how important it is to organize your approach to writing your dissertation, that you can't just do it without a good plan. So as you can see, I called it Recipes for Disaster. Mariam and Haifa were hanging out in the kitchen instead of working on the dissertation. Mariam said, I'm both a terrible cook and a brilliant one. I use instinct in the kitchen. Making a meal requires entering the kitchen, opening the cupboards and the fridge, observing what lies in front of me, concocting what sounds delicious in my head, cooking it, then sometimes devouring it with extreme pleasure, but more often than not chucking it in the bin. People say I should follow the recipe and it will all be clearer, but that's boring. And Haifa says, well, that's all very well. I hope I get lucky if I ever get an invite, but what has this got to do with writing my dissertation? So from this little story, the students will start discussing about what's this all about? What's this got to do with our dissertation? And hopefully with the guidance of the tutor, they'll work out that it's about planning, it's about structure, and so on. And then they'll make learning goals about how do you structure a dissertation, what is the best way to plan for the dissertation period, and so on and so on. Finally, using PBL tenets. So how can we take certain aspects of PBL when we're in a situation where we can't do PBL as it has been described? I want to give you one example of a few years ago where I work now. I had students who were like a CEFR B1, if you know that, like a sort of a lower intermediate, pre-intermediate level. And we had been studying comparatives in the class. And a lot of the time students, they want you, the teacher, to give them reinforcement options. So they'll be expecting you to spend your hours in the evening sitting down under a light with a cup of coffee, typing out all these worksheets or making Kahoots on the Kahoot platform or Socrates or whatever. And what are they doing? They're doing nothing. They're sitting at home waiting for you to do it. So that's not the PBL way. So being a PBL guy, I wanted them to do this independently. So I took the tenets of PBL and I asked them to do this. I said, go away, this is your homework, go home and find 3 websites online that have practice of comparatives. I showed them how to search, online for, gave them little steps, little scaffolding. Try them out, this is your homework, and select the one that will be the most useful to our class. Upload the link to that website or that web page on comparatives to the shared folder. And then in class, I asked them to try out 2 new ones compared to their best one and to try and determine if they were better than the one that they had chosen to upload. And then to say, what is your final recommendation? So by designing things in this way, it actually reduces our work a little bit as teachers, but also the students have practiced an awful lot of skills. They practice research skills, critical thinking skills, trying to decide which one is the best. It's collaborative because they're helping out their fellow students. And what do we have at the end? I think in that particular class, there were like 20 students. I think we had 13 web links for comparatives that the students thought would be useful for the class. So the students could go at any time and practice their comparatives from 13 different sites. Now we have a tendency as teachers to want to do everything ourselves and to help the students and guide them. But this is one example of how we can get them to work out how they can do things for themselves. They don't have to wait for us to tell them what to do. They don't have to wait for us to start learning. So as I've given you some of the PBL tenets that are being applied here, in my view. Now, of course, there are context limitations and solutions of PBL. Oh, sorry, somebody was talking? Sorry, so there's context limitations and solutions of PBL. Sometimes the institution where you work is not into this kind of learning and they may not be supportive of it. So the solution for me is to focus on the tenets of PBL in the chosen method. I call it the Trojan horse approach. Sneak PBL into your classroom, okay? And try to use it in whichever way you can to try to get the students to think for themselves. The student study background is, of course, negative as well. If they are not used to this, be patient and be willing to train them. Take the time for them to buy into why it is, why it will make learning more engaging and benefit them in the long term. And lose your sage on the stage syndrome, okay? Or accept that PBL is not for you. If you are the kind of person who jumps in when the students are struggling and says, oh, don't worry, I will explain everything to you, yeah? That's not PBL and that's not useful in for the students. They need to struggle a bit at the beginning and get better at it. And you have to try to control your urge to jump in and to help them too much. When I was a PBL tutor, I used to tutor subjects, which is not my specialization, which was perfect. I had basic information about the task, but I focused on the process of PBL, not on the content. They could ask questions to their lecturer or the experts, but in the PBL session, it was all about the process. So if we come back to the learning outcomes, I don't know if we had a chance to meet them all, but these were what they were. I hope that you are able now to explain the tenets of PBL to others, that you understand the link and the differences between PBL and TBL, and you can see how PBL can be applied to some elements of TESOL. And finally, maybe you'll do this outside the session, you can reflect on how you might utilize the tenets of PBL in your teaching context. So really, it's now time for you to reflect on how, to what extent you feel that you can apply some of these tenets to your own teaching context. thank you very much. I know we've got a few minutes left for questions. If you want to contact me and learn more about it or discuss it in any way, that's my email address, mickjack66@gmail.com. So please feel free to do so. I'm going to come out of screen share and come back into the room.
Thanks very much, Mick.
And I'm happy to take any questions.
And we thoroughly enjoyed it. And now, the floor is open for questions. If someone has questions, so please put them in the chat box. Let me, monitor the Facebook comments box if there are any questions on Facebook.
I'm going to write, someone's asked for my email in the chat box, so I'm going to put that in.
All right.
I'm just looking at some of your comments. Better for secondary levels, creative method for any learning area. It could be possible for low and young learners. You could start from young learners, all very interesting.
There was a question,
yeah, a lot of you feel that you can do this.
Yep, there was a question, can PBL be applied with individual student? Can it be a, drawing project?
I would say a project is a project. So I wouldn't say that problem-based learning is the same as project-based learning, because you're not asking the students to produce a product. You're asking them to analyze a situation and learn something from it, and then discuss what has been learned. So that's really what it is about. I'm just scrolling back before we finish, see if there's anything.
Yeah,
so
and there was another question.
Because individual, you need to have the interaction,
Okay. Yeah, so there was another question that says, how to apply this PBL in online classes.
Well, that's tricky. I mean, I think, but if you have a genuine PBL group, then why not? I haven't done it, but I'm envisaging that I'm there looking at the screen and I see my 12 students, and then the board secretary shares the screen and uses the whiteboard on the screen, or we use shared documents on Google. So yeah, why not? Why not? I think it could work.
And we have lots of comment that says, we are listening about PBL for first time.
Oh, well, it's actually, it goes back a few decades. This model comes from the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. And I worked in Stenden University in the Netherlands, and then Stenden University here in Qatar. I don't work at that university now, but I haven't taught PBL for over 11 years, but it's still part of my teaching philosophy. So when people ask me about the teaching philosophy, I say it's communicative language teaching, it's PBL, and it is a humanistic teaching, because these are the three things that have impacted me the most. So this is what I try to apply in my teaching. Yeah.
Adija asks, is it just giving the points of what will be discussed and keep it on students to find out in their own way?
I didn't quite get, Hadija, I didn't quite understand the question. Could you?
So she asks, is it just giving the points of what will be discussed and keep it on the students to find out their way?
Yes, that's right. You don't tell them what to do. You don't give them the answers. That's basically the two basic rules. You guide them towards where they need to be. If you are the tutor, you will have like a list of probable learning outcomes. But this is a very important point, and this is why I don't like final assessments. It can happen sometimes in the classroom that students, they want to find something out. They come up with a learning outcome which is not on your prescribed list of learning outcomes that the students should get. So what should you do? Should you say to them, no? No, you shouldn't. You should say to, if you can see the link to the topic and the students have an interest in finding it out, then you should let them go and do that research as well. Where they get angry is when they find out that it's not going to be on the final exam. Because, so that's why I don't like final exams for PBL.
Great. So thanks, Mick. You know, it was a great session. Absolutely honored to have you here with, teacher development webinars. So thank you for your participation, all the attendees.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
If I can just apologize to everybody that I couldn't see the chat during the session. I wanted it to be a bit more interactive, but never mind. I hope that you found it useful, and I really appreciate everybody joining in, and also the people on Facebook. And thank you again, Amanullah, for giving me the opportunity to share something that I'm a big fan of and I like talking about.
Thanks very much, Mick. You know, it was an honor to have you here this evening, and thank you all everyone in attendance. You can follow our social media channels. We are available on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and this recording will be made available on Teacher Development Webinars YouTube channel later this evening. So you can, have a better idea by rewatching it, and you can apply PBL in your classrooms and let us know how does it go with you. And maybe if you have, some interesting ideas about applying it with online classes, you can make a 3 to 5 minutes video of teaching tips and share with us at teacherdevelopment.webinars@gmail.com, and we'll be sharing it with a wider audience. So yeah, thanks everyone, and let me remind you at this point that COVID-19 cases have been on rise, and please be responsible for your lives, for your loved ones' lives. Practice physical distancing, keep wearing masks, and so don't forget, social solidarity. Thanks very much again. We'll be having a next webinar on this Saturday, and it's about creating a positive school environment. So I hope to see a lot of you there.